So today we're going to walk through a few things in the childhood stage. I'm going to talk also at the beginning about emotional development and probably hit a little bit of that every class we have. Um, Today will be kind of like a super broad overview of emotional development, and I mainly do that because in like clinically speaking, this is the areas that we focus a lot in with folks that we work with. And obviously, we do it in different ways for kids versus adolescents versus adults, but it's still a large part of our development. So I'm gonna start there, and then we're going to jump to um, several different aspects of childhood development. Some of it will be kind of like just straight lecture, and then some parts we're going to do a couple of breakout room discussions as we go along. And then hopefully by the end, I'm going to land in the area of parenting. I started talking about this more the last few years, mainly because no matter if you're school counseling or LPC, LMFT, you're going to talk with people about parenting at some point. It's a large part of people's lives. It's a huge transition. Um, People are doing it later than they have ever before, which there's probably upsides and downsides of that. There's a lot of research out there talking about um, the adjustments that can be made or that are made when you go from just people, whether they're married or not, and then they have kids. That's a big adjustment, and depending on their stage of development, um, it can be bigger versus other times. And so parenting becomes a pretty large topic of discussion, and so we're going to look at that as well, kind of towards the back end today. What I have found is that particular topic also causes people to have very strong opinions, which is fine. We're going to try to also mainly focus on kind of what the research tells us, not necessarily like what I think or um, what anyone else thinks. So, having said all that, let's jump in. I put the slides are all on Moodle if you want them. The let me get this. There we go. Okay. So I'll put I'll put all the slides on Moodle. If you'd like to grab them, you can. Um, I'll share these two as I go, and I'll probably click off this every once in a while when we start talking. But I'll share these with you now. So emotional development is a key process of the human development. One of the things that we know for sure is that um, we start having specifically emotions like guilt. We start having pretty early on in our life, and then we have them forever. Uh, Obviously, there are some folks that might have experienced them differently than others. How we express them can be different for people. How we either acknowledge them or not can be different. All of those things can be different, but those are typically mostly reactions to emotions, not the emotions themselves. The emotions themselves are, for the most part, automatic. We don't necessarily have a lot of say or control of which emotions come to us. We just have more say or control over how we respond or react to them. And we'll talk more about that as we go. So if we look at just for the sake of kind of organizing our discussion, if we think about secondary emotions versus primary emotions, and these are only a few, this isn't exhaustive. Secondary emotions are those emotions that would probably more easily be accessed or at least described by people. Um, Primary emotions maybe take a little bit more reflection or a little bit more self awareness. For example, uh, feeling alone, that's not in here, but feeling alone is a pretty strong primary emotion that sometimes we're not sure that's what it is. And we have to kind of think through it. Where we help people the most is helping them to discover what their primary emotions are that they're feeling, and then allow them to feel it because they don't hurt us. They just don't feel good. I'm not saying they're awesome to have, but they don't do anything to us. Um, but we need to be able to describe them and talk about them. Secondary emotions typically are, we can usually kind of get to those like a frustration or irritation or even anger to a certain extent. When we say anger, like for example, if we talk about anger for a second, um, anger is made up of a couple of different parts. If we think about uh, like this is a common iceberg analogy that you can use for emotions too. But if we think about anger as an like made up of like an iceberg, everything above the water you can see, right? The words, the actions. Um, it's easier to see that someone's angry, even nonverbal things. What we don't necessarily know or necessarily see is what's below the water. And if we take the analogy further, if we think about like what sank the Titanic, it wasn't what they saw. They saw the iceberg, fine. They knew it was there. They just had no idea how large it was underneath, and they couldn't turn the ship in time, and that's what sank it. And so, um, a lot of times with anger, if someone feels insecure, or if someone feels scared, or if someone feels overwhelmed, or um, if someone feels disrespected, is one I hear often. That's obviously going to cause some type of anger and also some type of reaction that's usually not nice. It's usually going to be something that's going to be, uh, kind of a strong reaction. This also includes times where we have no outward reaction, or we just kind of stonewall, or we just ignore. That's also someone can be just as angry. They don't have to yell and scream and throw stuff. Someone can be just as angry, um, but not say anything. And that can be almost more difficult in the therapy room because they're not talking, which something's going on, and they might even say I'm fine or whatever, or not talk or not want to talk. Um, in those times, usually silence is your best friend. Um, but when we think about emotions like anger, it's always good to keep in mind that we're not just talking about what we see. There's always something going on underneath. And that is true not just for adults, but kids, teens, every human being. There's usually some reason why someone's angry. Um, Now, how quickly they become angry and how quickly they de escalate, that can be different based on people and based on personality type, based on the situation. Um, those things can change. When we think about uh, early childhood, um, and we start to think about like not only having emotions but expressing them, it's not uncommon for kids in early childhood. So we're talking about coming out of toddler, um, into that kind of beginning elementary age. You're talking about kids can show pride or shame, embarrassment, guilt. Um, Pride and guilt are pretty common. Guilt is one of the first emotions that we feel for a reason, and we're going to talk about this specifically later. But we need to actually be able to feel guilt because that actually lets us know that one, we're alive, and two, there's other people around us. So it's actually kind of an important one. One of the very important parts of expressing emotions, especially early in childhood, is it is very influenced by parents or caregivers' responses to children's behavior, not necessarily their response to their emotion per se, but their response to their behavior, which is kind of important. In other words, when um, there's a response that comes across shaming or fear-based because of a behavior, kids are going to respond in a pretty specific way. Now, having said that, please don't ever hear me or anyone else say, well, all parents should be robots and respond exactly right every time and everything needs to be perfect. That's not like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about over a period of time, over years of someone's life, not just one time. Um, Obviously, anyone that's ever had children, especially young children, it's very difficult to be smiling all the time and respond well all the time. It's not possible. And it doesn't, you don't need to. Kids are very resilient. They're elastic and they bounce back quick. There's a couple of keys here that we'll talk about later in terms of response and repair attempts and things like that. We'll talk about that later. I think the main thing is to know that when we're working with parents, it's okay to work with them and how they respond and how they react and respond and help them to kind of think through that. That can be very, very helpful for people. And a lot of times we learn our parenting style from where we grew up and how we were parented most of the time, not all the time, most of the time. Now we can learn on Google. Luckily, we have Google and Wikipedia and TikTok. And so that just teaches us all kinds of great things. Um, so when kids can understand their emotions, it is linked to pro-social behavior. When they can learn um, that people can feel differently about similar events that happen. Uh, this is kind of a weird one and kind of a goofy one, but like kids, especially if they're in sports, one team wins, one team loses, same event, but everyone experiences it differently, and most of the time they watch it on their parents' faces first, let's say, right? So it's basically the same kind of thing that's happening, but they experience it very differently. Um, Most kids, mostly by the age of 5, um, they can kind of feel like, okay, wait a minute, I need to manage these emotions in social situations. Um, Most kids can kind of figure that out. Obviously, there's some developmental delays there with some kids, but for the most part, that's one of the things that happens, and that's a natural part of socio-emotional development that happens for human beings. Is especially by elementary, you can kind of tell when you need to try to manage your emotions in a certain way. Emotional regulation is a key part of not just childhood, but just humankind, mainly because emotional regulation is something that you do have to work on, and it is a skill that you learn over time. There are some people that might more naturally be better at it than others, for sure. But being able to modulate and regulate your emotions and your responses to the emotions are something that will probably keep therapists and counselors in business forever. Because we live in a world, especially right now, that's very reactive to all kinds of stimulus, and sometimes that shows up in weird places. Um, but learning how to kind of regulate, control our emotions. I've had many, many clients that signed up for therapy after they had an episode where they just like, lost their minds and were yelling and screaming, throwing things, and they'd never maybe ever done that before in their life. And it kind of scared them. They didn't know why, so they immediately signed up for therapy. And you kind of have to normalize it and say, well, one time out of 40 years, that's not too bad. It's okay. It sounds like though probably you learned to do something with your emotions that maybe wasn't as healthy. It's kind of like locking everything inside of a pressure chamber and just hoping it goes away, because they have to go somewhere. So emotional regulation is something that you start learning early in life, and it's a skill that you basically kind of keep up with your whole life. I think we talked about some of this already. I'm going to talk about some of this in a little bit. Um, we're going to talk about stress specifically. I want to we can talk about this really quickly. I actually use this with couples that I work with. Um, if we go back and we think about primary and secondary emotions, when we are able to kind of locate our primary emotion and then express it in a way that is helpful, not in a, you know, escalated way. If we can express it in a way that's helpful, it can actually connect us with someone and kind of lead to more intimacy. If we are not really able to grab that primary emotion and we kind of know the secondary emotion, um, or maybe we know the primary, but we're not really ready to express it because we don't want to be vulnerable and maybe we're scared. We might express a secondary emotion just because, and that a lot of times lead to this critical, blaming, defensive cycle that people can get into. Not just couples, just people can get into. One of the reasons that is because there maybe have been before a time where someone did express something that was vulnerable and it didn't go well, and maybe it wasn't cared for, and maybe it was used against us. Sometimes people can use our vulnerabilities against us. Maybe that happened, and maybe that had nothing to do with their partner. Maybe that happened in their life, like some other time, and so they just learned over time, like, hey, I don't. When I feel this thing, whatever this is, I know that I just need to lock that away and just do something else. Maybe they just learned that over time. And so one of the key features of our work can be helping them to at least unlock it and talk about it in a safe spot, in a safe way, in a safe environment that allows for them to realize that it's okay to talk about. I've had many sessions with couples where they've it talked about something that's very difficult for them, that really began long before they were married, like it was something that was happening, not even necessarily just childhood, but like maybe 10 years before. And they were able to talk about it in a vulnerable way. And their partner just listened and just didn't say anything, but was engaged. And one of the things that you can do is you can say, now look at your partner and notice that they're not yelling or screaming or backing away, or they were looking at you the whole time. They were listening to what you were saying. Um, that actually helps to show people that it's okay to talk about these things in a safe way. Um, and that's what kind of what drives a lot of intimacy. When you can lay a layer of empathy on top of it, it really helps people express those things more readily. Now, not every single discussion is a primary emotion discussion. Not all issues are come from that, um, but a good many stem from that. And so, if you can help people work through those difficult times, difficult emotions, you can actually help people kind of work through things quicker and kind of get to. They're able to kind of generate their own solutions that way. So, okay, all right. So, just in general, um, when we think about emotions, and I'm going to talk about a lot of these things over and over, not just today. Um, you can really think about emotions as data. They're pieces of data. They're not directives. They don't tell us what to do. They're information that we're given that we can try to figure out what it's trying to say. Um, Emotions themselves have no memory. They don't. They just have a context that they live in. In other words, we can have an emotion today, right now, that maybe we had when we were 10 or 20 or 5. Same emotion, very different context or very different reasons. But we might have learned to react and respond a way based on a prior context, not the current one. And that's very true of trauma responses. Um, when we think about being trauma informed, we need to think about emotions as being sticky to a context. Emotions become sticky to that trauma and they don't let go. Even though we've moved forward, the emotions are still back connected to that trauma. like we talked about, there's primary and secondary, and they happen. It's okay for them, for emotions to happen. Now, it's not necessarily okay for us to do or say whatever we want after we feel them. That's where we get in trouble. Most of what we know of anger management, let's say, is not trying to control emotion. It's trying to work on our responses to an emotion. It doesn't have anything to do with what we're feeling as much as trying to control what we're feeling. Does that make sense? Hopefully, that's a lot of information. And I'm going to talk about a lot of this too as we go. I just kind of like to give a kind of a broad view of that. And we'll talk about emotional development each stage too. We'll talk a little bit more about it um, as we go along. Feel free to put things in the chat too, by the way. You can always do that. Okay. Now, we're going to do a couple of things that, real quick, what I'd like for everyone to do for the next, I don't know, couple of minutes, I'm going to talk about a couple of things, but um, before we have our first breakout room, I want to talk about um, cultural development, which we will again talk about every class and how culture plays a role in our development. And there's a couple of schools of thought about that, and that we've definitely become more culturally aware and culturally competent over time, even in our research studies, I think, which is good. Um, it's interesting, and when I teach this class in person, we'll have like a brainstorming. Hey, what's culture? And we just kind of write, several things, because culture, that's a big word. It incorporates lots of different things. What I'd love for you to do in the chat, if you can, just list out what you would consider culture, or what aspects, like what, if you weren't give a specific definition, but what aspects of that definition, like language, ethnicity, gender, that type of thing. What would you say, hey, if we're going to define culture, we need to include these things? And just put that in the chat. I'd love to see it. Yeah, family traditions, good. Norms, heritage, values, family of origin, yep. Environment, absolutely, yep. Beliefs and values, yep. Spiritual norms, absolutely. Parenting styles, right. Our language, our gender, our ethnicity. I think someone said spiritual, religious belief too. History for sure. And there are certain expectations. There's written rules, like written rules and unwritten rules that we have usually. So if we think about this kind of list, and you guys can pull this up and look at it, it's a good working list. Culture is one of those words. It's almost like pretty inclusive. Like there's several different ways to define culture, and things like roles in a family, like the roles that people play, can be culturally driven. I I worked with a man. What was this? It was a husband. I didn't work with the wife, but the husband from Nigeria. That was they had moved from Nigeria when I think he was a teenager. He was in his 30s when I worked with him. But he and his wife were from Nigeria, and they were married. And I spent a lot of time with him talking about, the difference in being an American, being in Nigeria, in terms of being a husband and a father, and the different roles that would be played. And he was having a little bit of trouble navigating some of that just from expectation standpoint. And I was, I was trying to learn from him just what, the differences there, because there can be vast differences. And even if you break that down into different like generations of time, the expectations and roles and values then versus now can be different as well. So there's even that kind of time element that we can talk about, because a lot of those things are passed down, like cultural, like parts of areas of culture are passed down too, from generation to generation. And so there's also that kind of time element to it. So this is good. This is great. It's a great list. What I'd love for you to do is, and I'm going to put you in groups to do this. There's a couple of different folks that in the book they talk about. Of course, Piaget is talks a lot about cognitive development. That's kind of his thing, and he has kind of a low view of the social pieces and the cultural pieces when it comes to development. He doesn't see it as big of a deal, versus someone like Vygotsky, who came along later and said, "Hey, well, I agree with the cognitive development pieces, but I think culture has a lot to do with it. I think culture has a large role to play." And so they have different views of some things, and they see some things the same. And what I'd like for us to do is in our groups, and I'm going to give you 7 or 8 minutes to do this. I want you to identify 5 or 10 characteristics that are highly impacted by culture when it comes to childhood development. And then 5 or 10 things in childhood development that don't have maybe anything to do with culture. And again, partly this is your opinion, partly this maybe you've read some things, but in a couple of some of these discussions are in later chapters. So if you've read ahead, you will see some of this information there. Because it also kind of goes to this question of nature and nurture, which is that ongoing, what is it genetic? Is it passed down? Is it something to do with the environment? And so 5 or 10 things that in childhood development that are really culturally driven, and 5 or 10 things that are not culturally driven. Does that make sense? And I'll give you a little time. What I'd love for you to do too is, if you don't know each other when you go into the groups, like introduce yourself. That usually helps. And when you do that, just say, hey, talk to each other about what you're like, the track you're on, and I love to also for you guys to talk about like where you live, because we have people from all different places, and then have that discussion. I'll give you 7 or 8 minutes to do that, and then we'll jump back in. Okay. Hopefully we didn't cut too many people off. All right. I'd love to hear some of the answers to what you guys discussed, starting with the what pieces are influenced by culture. Love to hear some of that. Anybody?
Group 3 came up with multi-generational and elder care norms.
Okay. Yep. Good. What else?
Group 3 came up with expectations, and as we said before, family and environment, like the position the child is in the family.
Okay. Yep. What about things that are not culturally, don't depend on culture? What did y'all talk about?
One of the topics in our group was attachment. And then we also talked about how attachment might fall or could fall into the cultural piece as well, a little bit, depending on culture, I suppose. But yeah, attachment was
Okay.
one of those.
Good. Good. Yeah, that's a good one. Anybody else?
And Priscilla and I talked a little bit about how even education that can be driven by your culture, depending on whether or not education is even available where you are. But it can also be non-culturally driven. If the given is your kid has to be enrolled in school in your country or your state or wherever you are, you might push culture to the side and say, well, we're going to homeschool, like Priscilla's homeschooling. I did the same thing. And we were kind of talking about how within cultural norms, there's that ability to step away and go against the grain a little bit.
Okay.
But we didn't make that fit.
Yeah. No, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Unless you're being countercultural for a reason, then you're being affected by culture, and your kids are too. So, right, you can argue it either way. But that's a good example. Yeah, that's a good example. Let me talk about attachment. I'm glad that got brought up. Let's talk about attachment theory super fast. I'm going to give you a 2 minutes, a 2 minute definition of, decades of research. I don't know why I do this, because you just go on TikTok and just watch everybody talk about it all the time and learn everything you need to know about it. Like, why are we in school? I don't even know why we're doing this. My wife is on me to do a TikTok. She wants me to do a channel so bad. I'm like, I don't want to do that. That just seems like too much trouble. Here's a way to think about attachment theory. And the foundation of attachment theory began decades ago, and John Bowlby is the one that first actually put pen to paper and really started coming up with the theory. Some of it seems a little bit just kind of intuitive, but there's also some nuances to it as well. One thing that there's stories about different, like how attachment theory came about, and one story is as at the end of both world wars, there were a tremendous amount of orphans, and in certain parts of the world there would be more than other parts, and inevitably a lot of the kids would end up like in an orphanage, which is mostly maybe a monastery, or sometimes governments would set up places, and there would always be way more kids than workers to attend to them, and obviously way more kids than they could be adopted out to parents. So one of the things that was noticed, this is more than once, but one of the things that was noticed is that an infant would cry, as they do when they need something, and if there weren't enough people to kind of get to the infant, some of them would stop crying, which they do eventually. But what they notice is and this is over time, this isn't like one time, this is over time, they would notice that some infants would just not cry ever again. They would just stop crying altogether. And one thing we know about attachment is when you make an attempt to attach, which that's what that is, an attempt for connection. If it doesn't go well, you might try again, and you might try multiple times, but eventually you'll stop, because you realize that there's not like a safe attachment there. Doesn't mean you can't live your life. Doesn't mean you can't do things, can't go through and you know live and get along and all those things. Doesn't mean any of that. However, in childhood, if you have an attachment disorder, it makes things in adulthood very difficult. And so if we look at just some basics of attachment, in the way in which our brain is wired for connection, and our brain is wired to work best when there's safe connection and secure connection. And I had a supervisor give this analogy that I thought was awesome. And I'm like, well, I'm stealing that. So I've used it ever since. If you can imagine when you were little and you were playing chase or tag and someone's chasing you, it's kind of fun. But basically, you're just trying to get to base. When you get to base, then they can tag you a million times. You'll never be it. If you fast forward into adulthood, even, we don't want to run from the people we're supposed to be the most secure with. And we don't want to chase them either. We want that relationship to be base. So we want that to be a safe place. And that's kind of how I frame it with clients that or people that I work with. Attachment is made up of multiple different variables for sure. And when we have a secure attachment, we typically have better relationships. Our self-esteem is a little higher. We have a little bit less self-doubt. Doesn't mean we're perfect. Just means we handle things a little bit differently, a little bit better. If we have an anxious attachment, we tend to be a little fearful when we get too close. We want it very badly, but we get too close, we get fearful. If we had an avoidant attachment, really, really want it, well, we'll do things to push people away just to see if they'll stay, or we'll run away. And so there's there's different aspects within those buckets as well. And so attachment theory is something that starts in childhood. And the original way that it was framed was mainly between mother and infant. That's how it was started. That's how John Bowlby started studying it. And now it's branched off into some other areas, but that's the original way. So your caregiver is the original figure. So in early childhood, it's not uncommon, and it's actually very normal, obviously, for obvious reasons, for children to be very attached to the mom for lots of reasons, but over time to become more attached to dad naturally as it progresses as they get older into later childhood. And that all depends on dynamics and environment, but that's a normal way that it happens. When we think about attachment, the reason why I like to think about attachment more globally, not just mother child, is because there are attachment to other figures. If you live in a home that's multi-generational, you're going to have attachments to multi-generations of folks. Does that make sense? So you're gonna naturally have that too. And so attachment's not just one way or just with one person. You can have multiple attachments. If we fast forward into adulthood, then if you had a pretty secure attachment in childhood and you find someone that also had a secure attachment in childhood, guess what? Your marriage is going to be pretty secure, fairly, which means you can have autonomy, right? Which means you can be so securely attached that you can be a separate and still be securely attached, which is very important because sometimes we have the opposite. We might be anxiously attached, and when we're apart, that makes it harder. And you might have clients that will. I've had this many times where I'll even have a husband or a wife, either one, will say, I text them, 50 times a day. Where are you? What's going on? What's happening? And I know I'm doing it, and I don't want to, but I can't help it. And that happens with folks. And these are adult people. These aren't, in high school, that's, okay, that happens. Junior high, high school, even in college. But when you get and you're working and where someone's at, they're at work, what they're doing, everything that they're doing because you told them, I need you to tell me everything you're doing all day. So that's a little bit of an anxious attachment. The great thing about attachment style is that you're not locked in. It can be changed and you can work on it. Now it's hard work, but you can do it and you become more secure. And it takes work from both ends too. But I think it's a great point. I'm glad you guys brought that up because attachment style can be cultural, but not cultural too. It's one of the theories that's definitely universal across cultures. It's multinational. Now, how cultures practice it could be different, and so And that has a lot to do. Now, the other thing to think about here is inside of childhood as a whole, when we start to think about parenting, you'll have different schools of thought about like okay, if a baby cries, should you pick them up or not? And you have various schools of thought about things like that. If you ask my grandmother, who had 6 kids, she'd be like, well, I couldn't pick them up all the time. So they eventually just stopped, they figure it out. I mean, but that we're talking about 2 generations ago. Today, that's probably not what people are told to do. They're probably told to pick, you know what I mean? So it changes over time, but the attachment theory pieces themselves hasn't really changed that much. How we develop hasn't really changed that much over time. Okay. I was going to talk about attachment today anyway, so that gives me a good chance to kind of do that. All right. You guys have any questions so far? Y'all are super quiet. Maybe everybody's just tired. I don't know. Okay. Let's jump into a couple of things here. Again, these PowerPoints are all on Moodle. I'll just share them. Do you guys like PowerPoint still? Does everybody still like those? I mean, no, I just do them for people that like them. You don't have to use them. Some people like them, some people don't.
Like them. I print them off in the little 4 squares on the
Oh,
paper.
I like
all the squares too. That's hardcore right there. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of different childhood areas that, clinically speaking, we're going to run into. For sure, any type of developmental delays in anything, right? So learning disorders, neuropsych disorders like ADHD, obviously all the mood areas, anxiety, depression. We're going to run into all those things inside of clinically speaking. Let's talk about executive attention or executive functions real quickly. I want to bring that one up specifically because that one starts in childhood and that one doesn't stop developing for decades. It's something that will branch out. I read a study recently that was talking about in ADHD that children that were diagnosed, oh man, I wish I should have printed this out. I still print my stuff out and read it. I can't read it online. Children diagnosed with ADHD, man, I could get this wrong. I feel like it was teenage years. They were showing some evidence that they were not maturing executive function wise until their early 30s. That's kind of a new thing. I'd never seen that before. I've only seen one study, so I don't know if I don't think that's been I don't know if that's like industry wide kind of belief, but we know for sure our brain takes about 25 years or so to develop fully. We do know that, especially the prefrontal cortex, which is where executive functions housed. We're going to go into a lot more brain study when we talk about adolescence next class. But if you think this is how I look at a brain, yeah, let's do it like this. So the prefrontal cortex is the knuckles at the front. You can do your own hand like this. It's a pretty easy way to look at a brain. Prefrontal cortex, if you do right in the middle, right? So right and left side are hemispheres. Inside that little almond little piece is the amygdala. It's connected to the limbic system. It's unfortunately not really connected to anything else. So when kids kind of lose their mind in a grocery store, they pop their top because that little piece is going crazy in there. We got to calm that little piece down so that we can have our full brain intact, right? So that's just kind of how you can look at a brain. When we think about executive functioning, emotional regulation is part of executive functioning. Some people genetically are better at regulating their emotions than others, even in childhood. That's why you will hear parents say, my son, he was great. He never blew up. My daughter, or vice versa. They lose their mind sometimes. That's because some people are better at it than others. But that also means that maybe they're better at other executive skills that their siblings aren't as good at. So we have about 12 of them. All of us are good at some of them, and all of us are not good at some of them. So planning, starting something, finishing something, organizing, emotional regulation, metacognition, which is a big one, thinking about thinking, those types of things. Those are all executive functions. All right, Chandra, you got your hand up. Almost stop.
Yes, I do. I just wanted to say that in DISD this last couple years, we've been working a lot with that with our
Mhm.
students. We've been following Tara Sumter, who
Yeah.
has
Mhm.
who works diligently about executive function and how that is a big misconception and how people don't understand exactly what it means and how it works.
Yep.
And I was the new role that they created was called Reset Coordinator. I did that for 2 years where we had to work with students on how to with starting with metacognition and then branching out from social there to social emotional learning, and
Mhm.
then how to deal with just flipping their lid in the classroom and where that
Yep.
came from, and then working with families on how to partner with the schools to help them with it.
Yeah, that's great. That's a super holistic approach. And I'm so glad that DISD is taking a holistic look, because executive functioning is not a death sentence either. It's something that can be worked on. There's skills that you can teach, that you can learn. And unfortunately, what's happened over the past is, let's say a child or adult even, or an adolescent is diagnosed with ADHD or any of those neurological issues, let's say, they might get a diagnosis and maybe get some help and some medication, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's nothing better than teaching them skills to use when something happens. For example, I work with a significant amount of adults right now in the tech industry that have ADHD, straight up, never diagnosed, but they have it. They've got it. And that skill set has allowed them to be very successful in their job. However, they can't keep their room clean. They can't keep their house clean. Their spouse is mad at them because they can't keep organized. So when you teach them skills, like, for example, and I teach this to my kids too, and I do this myself. And this is a practical thing. You can do this with anybody. Go into your room that's dirty, whatever, unorganized, whatever it is. Walk up to the first thing you come to and put that thing away. Don't pick anything else up. Put that one thing away. Like I've got a towel, like I've got to wash this today. So I use something all week, and I've got this in front of me. I'm gonna pick this up. I'm gonna go take it to the wash machine. Don't stop on the way. Don't pick anything else up. Just pick this up and go put this away. Go back and go to the next thing. I know that sounds weird, but that's a practical skill that when you teach someone, when they start doing it, two things happen. The first thing is they go, oh, okay, that wasn't hard, which we all know that intuitively. Second thing is they have an accomplishment and a success immediately. Here's the thing about ADHD and executive functioning. If you don't give automatic consequences, nothing happens. You have to have automatic consequences. That's why doing homework is like, they do homework and they finish it, and it's like nothing happens. Versus when they play a video game and they win something or lose something, it's like, bam, automatic consequence. That's why they'll keep doing it over and over and over. And that's just also object relation. That's just, CBT 101. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Chandra, you got me off. Now I'm on the rabbit trail. But I love this. I love this so much.
Sorry.
No, this is good. This is good. But that's how you have to help people. And the reason why I'm bringing it up this way is because in our minds as clinicians, we need to look at these. Okay, this is an opportunity this is like a change someone's life. Like this will like reshape how they do things, and it will help them. Now, they have to do it too, right? They have to do it over and over. You can't just be like, I'll do this one time and you're fine. Clean your room one time, or go do this thing one time. Not that. You have to do it over and over and over. And you can set up plans and strategies and things like that with them. But I love that if you can teach them in childhood, if you can teach them those things, and then they can develop it, and then they can make it their own. I've got plenty of clients that have ADHD, had it since they were kids, but still don't really struggle with that because they learned really good skills when they were young. They learned how to put them in to use, and they do them, and they're great. Now they might have some other things that are going on, but they're, they do well with those things. But when we think about executive functioning, we're talking about these skills that take decades to develop, right? That's why you have to tell kids something over and over. They don't get it one time. I got to tell some adults over and over some things. We don't just usually get it one time. If you've ever been to a church anytime, how many times have you heard a preacher say the same thing more than once for decades? How come God has told us the same thing for how long? Millennia. Because we don't learn quickly. We learn slowly. Our brain changes slowly. Does that make sense? What I'm saying? Now, I'm not trying to let people off the hook. I'm just saying when it comes to executive functioning, parents a lot of times have to become the prefrontal cortex for their kids too, which is why you tell them, don't touch hot things. Don't go run out in the street. There's just things you have to do because they're not thinking about it. If you think about it, when we come into the world, we don't know anything. We can't sit up. We can't roll over. We can't walk. We can't talk. We can't pick anything up. We can't feed ourselves. We can't go to the restroom. We go on ourselves. If you think about it, we teach them everything. So why is this different? It's really not. It's just a way that we have to do it, and be intentional about it. So now I'm all off. I don't even know where we're talking about. We're talking about executive function, but see, I'll get off on these rabbit trails because I'm very passionate about this. I think it's very important. I'm like half as passionate as Dr. Armstrong. He'd spend like 3 hours talking about this.
But Dr. Babb, I
Yeah.
have a question since you're talking about ADHD in adults.
Mm-hmm.
My son is 43.
Mm-hmm.
He's had it since a child, but as a child, I learned how to manage it with certain foods and different things, not letting him have it. Now that he's adult, he's struggling with it.
Yeah.
He don't want to get on medication.
Yeah.
So I have one, he has ADHD, and then I have a 36-year-old daughter that has ADD. So what does the brain go to sleep? And that's what causes ADD? Well, she had a childhood nervous breakdown, and
Yeah. No, I understand. It's a great question. Brain definitely doesn't go to sleep. It actually lights up in different ways. So people's brains work different, right? So that's true of every human being. I'm gonna throw some things out, not knowing your kids, but just like as information. It's not uncommon, as we were talking about executive functioning. It's not uncommon for anybody to get really good at, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 executive functioning skills. And they're just really good at it, and not really good at like 4 or 5 of them. And those, as we get older, maybe those 4 or 5 are what we need more of and not less of as we get older, right? What we can do is we can actually, if we can figure that out, we can really, really, really work on making those 7 or 8 really strong, and not focus on those 4 or 5 as much, because they can kind of overcompensate for those. That's one thing. The second thing is, sometimes in adulthood, there's other factors going on, probably. In other words, if someone has ADHD in adulthood or as an adolescent, it's also not uncommon for them to have depression, or for them to have anxiety or some other mood disorder. That doesn't even have to be like a major depression where I can't get out of bed. It doesn't have to be that. It could be certain symptoms that are just kind of too hard to overcome. For example, like a motivation, losing interest in things that you used to have interest in, kind of feeling like you're losing your way a little bit. That happens. That's a pretty normal thing in life in general that will happen from time to time, but it might be exacerbated with ADHD. Those are just examples. That's just, it doesn't have anything to do with like the brain going to sleep, as much as the brain is wired a certain way, and maybe they're just not using parts of their brain that they were using before. And it also, like I said, 9 times out of 10, medication is not bad. I think it can be helpful. 9 times out of 10, if you get with the right therapist, they can really help them kind of figure out how to cope with it now. Because maybe the coping skills you learned like in childhood and adolescence were good, but maybe they don't work as well now. Maybe you just need to learn new skills, if that makes sense. But that it's not uncommon. It's definitely not uncommon to see the symptoms of ADHD as we get older. Probably all of us have a little bit of that, especially if we go strictly by the DSM, like attention, for example, like keeping attention. It's very difficult for all of us to hold attention now. It's just more difficult now than it ever has been. So even keeping attention is difficult because we're distracted just in general. So, okay, I'm gonna move on. We kind of talked about this. I just talked about that. Okay, this is important. There's some areas of development that are really important as we go through our developmental stages. The first one is this idea of self, like developing a view of self, understanding you and understanding others. And I mentioned earlier, like we have guilt that comes, and we kind of need that guilt because it tells us that we're alive and that there's also other people alive. There's two kinds of guilt that human beings can experience, and there's variations of it, but two basic kinds. The first kind is what we're talking about now, where I've done something wrong, I made a mistake, maybe I hurt someone's feelings, or maybe I did something bad, and I feel bad about it. I need to make amends for it, and I feel guilty until I repair it. That's one kind of guilt, because I did something. The second kind of guilt is I didn't really do anything wrong, but I'm made to think I did, and I feel guilty about something I didn't do. I didn't do anything wrong, and that one really leads to more shame. Like I've done something wrong, but maybe I really didn't do anything wrong, but you still feel guilty. That one's harder to work with because the truth is you didn't do anything wrong, but you think you did. And trying to convince someone that they didn't do something wrong when they think they did is very difficult. Does that make sense? Especially in childhood, if they carry that with them and that gets locked in, that gets very difficult. So you need that kind of guilt piece to come up because it lets you know that you're in a world or surrounded by people and you're a self. You have to have a self before you have a self ID, which comes in adolescence. So you got to have a self first. This sounds kind of easy and simple, but if you don't have it, it's kind of a big deal. It's also where, like Freud would talk about this in terms of ego, like learning, like that's where he would talk about the self-centered ego pieces. That's where he would talk about it. Now that's morphed probably now a little bit into more humanistic thought. Humanistic theory leads us a little bit more away from that selfish pieces into like, hey, we're all human beings. We're all kind of selfish anyway, not just kids. But having that self concept is very important. You can also kind of confuse that self with ability and effort. It's not uncommon for us. This is super nuanced. When you think about as kids get older, and now we're talking about coming out of toddler, especially coming out of toddler, early elementary, as kids kind of learn about themselves and who they are and what they are, and we've already talked about they kind of start to get a sense of the social world around them. That's when they start, building on self-worth and esteem and confidence and things like that. It's not uncommon for parents or caregivers or anyone to say, "Oh, you're so awesome, you're doing great." That's not uncommon. That's an encouraging thought. The issue comes when that becomes internalized, like that they are the best at something, therefore they can't make mistakes. You don't want that. So it's a nuanced thing. When you concentrate on ability and effort, that's a different thing. You did your best there. Did you do your best? Did you try your hardest? And that's all that matters. Did you not try your hardest? what happened and what happened there, what do we need to do, versus, oh, you're fine, everything's great, you're the best. That's not horrible, but in the long run, it doesn't help them. And the reason why is we have to be able to have the capacity as human beings to do a couple of things. The first one is know that we're around and know other people are around, like have a sense of ourselves in the midst of something bigger. That's important. Second thing is we have to be able to make mistakes. It's very important. Now, we don't live in that world right now where mistakes are always okay. Always. We have to be able to make mistakes because that's how we learn. Right? Like if we take it back even to infancy, a child will roll over, then sit up, grab, their eyes, basically their senses come online. And they start to explore their world. That's what happens. Right? When they start crawling, they're trying to go for stuff. How many did they do it automatically one day? No, they fall over, they roll around, they get dirty, they, hit their head. When they walk, did they just get up and walk one day? No, they fall down, they hit their head. They don't do it automatically. But as they get older, there becomes a belief that they need to do what? Get it right the first time. And that's impossible. Doesn't even make sense. If you think about it, it doesn't make sense. Now, take that message, fast forward into adulthood, and I apologize if I'm bringing up personal things for people, but this happens. And they're in a job and it doesn't go well. And something happens and they've never really had that happen before. It's devastating. And they don't realize that mistakes are part of life. You know what I mean? Mistakes are part of life. And struggle is part of life. Like we're going to struggle with some stuff. That's part of life. So it's okay to learn that. I'm not saying I wish it on people. I'm not saying I wish everyone to have a horrible life. I'm not saying that. But some people do. And that's part of life. So some of our ability as human beings to have a struggle and adapt to the struggle is a huge part of becoming human. Does that make sense? Now, I know I'm talking about childhood and kids are not wired to do that, but this is when it starts. That's why focusing on effort and ability and work and what they're, that's why it's important. Not, oh, you did that perfect. No, you did a good job. You really worked hard. My son decided this year he really wanted to get better at his clarinet, and he's actually really, really, really talented, super talented. He just sat down at a piano one day and started playing it, but he doesn't he didn't care. But this year he got really serious and he got like 13th out of 60 chairs in our region, which is a huge deal. He's never done anything like this before. But he worked hard on it. And that's what I told him. I was like, I'm proud of how hard you worked. This is hard. You did a lot of hard work. You worked really hard on this versus I know you're awesome. You're the best. That's not bad, but focusing on things that really matter are very, very important. And when you do that, you realize that you give them the ability to try and also fail. And that's really important in childhood. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I feel like I'm rambling now a little bit. That stuff's really important. And you'll read in the book, he'll talk about a lot of this too. They'll start going through, and there's different theories about all of these things too, like how this works. That's why we need to learn theories of cognitive development, socio-emotional development, because every theory talks about things like this, and there's little strings tied to all of them. That's why we need to learn that. And you'll read about it as you go through. I've actually given you guys some documents on Moodle that are just like the breakdown of all the theories in the developmental stages. That's just for you to have. I got it from another professor and I've kind of changed it a little bit over time, but I just thought that was really helpful to have, especially for those of you that are like me, that I like the big picture. I like to see kind of everything and then kind of put it together. And so that stuff's really important. we're going to run out of time. I just know we are.
Dr. Benford, I would
Yeah.
like to comment what you just said. Yeah, it really makes sense because as I've just told you, I have my youngest daughter, she has ADD and she's a perfectionist.
Mhm.
And on her job, her supervisor always telling her she's done great work, but
Yep.
she still nitpicks
On herself.
on herself.
Yeah.
And then she stresses herself out.
Yep.
And my question to her is your supervisor has okayed your work. He had told you how good it is. So why you keep giving yourself a hard time, beating yourself up about it? And she just nitpicks everything.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that could happen. That could be a nature or nurture. It I mean, that could happen to anybody. And that's not all right. Total rabbit trail. This is free of charge. I'm gonna give everybody this free of charge. The one common denominator we have in our world right now that lends our brains to go down that self-critical trail is the fact that we have social media and devices that lead us to negative thoughts more often than not, and on purpose. Now, I like social media. I'm a fan of it. I use it all the time. I think it's great. But you have to understand the basic development of it is to hold our attention. And the way we hold human beings' attention is to use negative messaging. And unfortunately, we reinforce it by what we actually view because the algorithms inside of that will give us those views over and 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 over. So that we will begin to compare ourselves with what we see, which most time isn't necessarily always true anyway. I'm not anti-social media. I'm not against screens. I think they're fine. They're not going anywhere. They're not going anywhere. I think it's fine. There's nothing wrong with them. But we have to understand that it clicks a little bit of a marker inside of our brain that turns on that kind of self-critical piece. Maybe not in everybody, because there's plenty of people that really don't get on it that much too. Some of that also is a drive, an inner drive that we have too to be good. I talk to people all the time that are real type A that really want to have successful careers. And I say, well, don't throw that out. That's great. Let's use that. At the same time, let's learn how to give yourself a little bit of grace, right? Like how we take care of ourselves and things like that. So it's a little bit of a balance there, I think. But our brain in general is not wired for happiness at all. Our brain is wired for survival, period. Our brain's just there to keep us alive. Now, we can choose happiness and we can choose things that keep us happy and things like that. That's absolutely true. We needed all of that, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago when there was things chasing us that could eat us and kill us. And, we needed that. But we don't need it like everyone in their house right now. I'm assuming there's no like bear in your room chasing you or someone with a stick. You know what I'm saying? Now, if someone did come in, you need that part of your brain, right? But right now, we're okay. But our brain still responds the same. We're going to talk about that more next time, and the next when we start talking about some anxiety and depression and things like that. There's no way I'm going to get through everything. This always happens. I have like 50 slides. I don't even know why I have so many. Never going to get there.
With the mention of so many slides, what do we need to concentrate on in terms of your slides with the material that we're reading?
It just goes with the reading.
Okay.
It just follows it.
Yeah.
And this is multiple chapters too of stuff. So, I really want to talk about parenting. All right, let me talk about a couple of things, and we're going to actually start here next time. Someone make a note because I'm going to forget and remind me that I said we're going to start with these parenting ideas, because that's going to fall into adolescence work too. So I'll stop kind of here today. Someone's going to have to remind me because I'm going to forget. I know I will. Let's talk about parenting just really quickly. And the book will go into a lot of detail about this too, and give you all the research behind it about the different styles, Baumrine's kind of styles. And I skip over it there. Just kind of parenting styles broken into 4 different kind of styles. There might even be a really cool graphic now in the new editions with it. So basically kind of looking at evidence-based approaches to parenting and looking at different styles of parenting. One of the things that I will always say when I talk about this in class, if I'm teaching something, or if I'm talking with clients, I don't throw parents under the bus. I don't throw your parents or your parents' parents or your parents' parents' parents. We don't do that. Everyone does something for a reason. Everyone makes choices for a reason. Your choices and my choices are different, and that's okay. I'm just going to present you with what the evidence tells us when it comes to parenting styles, which typically seems to work the best on the long run. We're talking about long-term parenting, right? Okay. You're going to work with clients that are going to come to you. They're going to have infants, little kids, or teenagers, or adult kids. You're going to have all of that, right? All along the way. Once you're a parent, you're a parent. Now, how you do the parenting is different. And so you're going to have people come to you at different places. My assumption would be everyone in this class right now, if you're a parent, you're probably a parent at a different stage. You have kids that are, well, Angela just talked about her kids are older. She has a 30 and 4-year-old kids versus some of you might have kids, I've got a 16 and 15-year-old. Some of you might have kids younger, and then everything in between, right? So you parent them differently. Does that make sense? One thing we know for sure about families, all the family research says the same thing about a couple of different keys. The more adaptable and flexible you can be within your family values, the better you have or the less struggle you have. Doesn't mean it's easy, just means you're adaptive. Let me give you an example. If you say, I'm going to turn this off so I keep looking sideways. I want to look at everybody straight on. If you say, first time one of your kids goes with some friends somewhere, you need to be home by 9. I'm making all these times up. And then they get older and you say, well, you can be home by 11, whatever. Let's say they graduate, they're a senior in high school and their curfew's midnight, whatever. And then they go to college and they come back and your curfew's still midnight. Does that make sense? Probably not. Or even back it up. Your curfew's 10. Okay, well, you're going to, I mean, you can do that, but you're going to be in trouble. You're going to have some struggle. Okay, that's an example. Flexibility and adaptability. And there's other little ones too. But if we can be flexible and adaptable, which means as our kids get older, if we can allow them to have a little bit of responsibility, which is good. Everybody wants that for sure. We can let them have a little bit of say in discussion. Everybody wants that. That you should want that. It doesn't mean they're in charge. It doesn't mean that they make all decisions. It doesn't mean any of those things. It just means that you become more adaptable and flexible as they get older, because you're kind of like a cop with them when they're little. You're more like a coach when they're in adolescence. You're kind of a consultant when they get into be, in their adult years. And then they become a cop with you when you get older. That's kind of how it works in general. The reason why I'm saying it that way, and that's not mine. I heard a pastor say that one time, but I've read it other places too. Like that little phrase has been around. And obviously environment matters. If we're talking about a traumatic environment or someone's in addiction, that changes. Like if all things are being equal in general, that's kind of how it works. If you're not adaptable and flexible over time, it's going to be hard. You're going to have a hard time. Case in point, I have clients right now, adult children that I'm meeting with, their adult parents. These are people in their 40s and 50s meeting with their parents that are in their 60s and 70s. And they're having a hell of a time talking to each other. They have different political views, they have different religious views, they have differences of opinions about all kinds of stuff. And they're both inflexible. Both of them, not one of them, both of them. They're not flexible, they're not adaptable. And that just means they're just butting heads. Now we'll have to say they learn that inflexibility at home because their parents are very inflexible on where they're at, for sure. However, there's just no flexibility in helping them kind of talk with each other. And that's actually happening a lot in a lot of places right now. So being able to be adaptable and flexible is very important. In the assessment class that I teach, we talk about this a lot more, and you can actually measure for it and assess it and see how flexible and adaptable. Now you can be too flexible, you can be too adaptable, right? That's chaotic. That you can do that, and that's not good either. So there's kind of a sweet spot, and the sweet spot's actually a pretty big spot. It's not like one little number or one little area. And it's still, like I said, doesn't matter. Doesn't mean that you're not in charge. My daughter right now, she's 15 going on 30. And I love her. She's super smart. She's going to do amazing things in her life. And she's got a very creative brain. And we've really let her be creative, let her try different things. She's a great writer. She wants to write, which is awesome. But she also comes with all kinds of ideas. And so right now her idea is she wants to get a pet, which we already have a dog. And it took me 15 years to allow us to have a dog because I knew who was going to take care of the dog. And I didn't want to take care of the dog. And I take care of the dog. But now everybody paid a third. My kids paid a third and we paid a third for the dog. I thought they'd never raise the money. They raised it in like 2 months. I thought they'd never do it. She wants a pet. She wants a dog. Really what she wants is a cat. She's allergic to cats. My wife is allergic to cats. She'll blow up like a balloon. And we say, Parker, you can't have a cat. Over and over. There she is right there. She's standing right there. She can't have a cat. But she wants to have a cat so bad. She really wants a cat. I am not going to be flexible about this. Because I'm in charge of that rule. Now, when she turns 18 or 20 or whatever, and she's on her own, and she wants to get a cat and her face blow up like a balloon, okay, go get a cat. Awesome, go do it. But right now, I'm in charge of that. Does that make sense? Not just me, my wife. We're both like, oh my God, we're crazy. So she's gonna get a stupid guinea pig, and we're like, they're nocturnal, Parker. You're never gonna sleep, and they stink. Whatever. She's gonna pay for it herself. She's raising all the money herself. I'm not buying anything. Is that mean? No. It's realistic. She's standing out there. She's going to be yelling at me when I come out. My point about it is we can be flexible with things, but we don't have to be totally flexible. We can be adaptable. We don't have to be totally adaptable. It's okay to hold on to things that you don't want to adapt to. At the same time, it's also important to remember that it's not just us involved. There's other people. And that we'll talk about empathy, and we're going to talk about a lot of those other things as we go along. But when we pick up next time, we talk about parenting, we'll start with the styles, the 4 styles. We'll talk about those because that doesn't have anything to do with just children, adolescents, adults. Parenting is parenting, and the styles are kind of pretty much well researched. And you guys can read about it too. The book does a great job of walking through it and talking about it. The next time we'll talk more specifically about screen time and effects of screen time. We'll talk about that a little bit more. There's a lot of really great research out there about it now that I think is really helpful to read. If you guys ever want to look at more evidence-based research, if you go onto Google Scholar, or you can just Google this. This is easy. You can get heads up when new research comes out on any topic. this research, and it'll send you a like a little link of the latest research. Like right now, I've been researching soft skills training because I work a lot with that right now, just in my job. So I get a lot of articles about that right now. So that's kind of what my buzz phrase. If you go into Google it, you can get that. Hang on a second, I'll tell you what it's called. The Google Conversation Agents is one thing I've been looking at, soft skills training. So Google Scholars Alert is just a great way to get, pretty up to date. Some of the articles, it always just comes back to like just using those keywords. So some of the articles aren't awesome, so you kind of can vet that, but that's just a great way to do that. Okay. I think that's it. Your first assignment's due, I think Saturday, right? I think next Saturday. Yeah, the exercise 1. So the part you turn into me, the first review, connect, reflect. Written portions due to me next Saturday, anytime, community time during the day. I don't care when. And then we'll be off for 2 weeks, technically, for the holidays. And then our next class will be on January 6th.
I do have need.
Yeah.
Oops, excuse me. I
No, go
wanted
for
you to clarify with the review with that section.
Mhm.
You said that like in one chapter there may be 3 sections. So do we have to do? You said we didn't have to do all 3. We just have to do 1, correct?
Just one.
Okay, and so anyone from and it said on the syllabus that it was, I think it said emphasis, but it can't. So that means it can't be chapter 1 and chapter 2.
It could be any chapter.
Any chat? Okay.
Yeah. I
Okay.
just use those as an example.
Okay.
Yeah. If you wanted to do all 3 assignments from one chapter, you could do that too. Like if there were 3 sections
Mhm.
in a chapter and you
Mhm.
were just like, well, I'm gonna do all 3 of my exercises at once, you could do that.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. Yeah. But you're only required to do 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because in chapter 1, it has 4.
Right.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was-
The chapters have different amounts in them. Yeah. Yeah.
And chapter 2 has 3.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah. And the chapters get a little bit longer too as you go
Okay.
along.
Do you still want it to be 3 to 4 pages, or is it modified since it's just 1?
No, just 1 to 2 pages. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I made that change. I didn't have a chance to change it in the syllabus, so I changed it now for next time. But
Okay.
it helps me read them quicker and get back to you quicker if it's just 1. Here's the other thing. We're not going to have a final. I've decided. We are going to do something, but it won't be a final. I've got a couple of ideas, but I'm gonna think about it a little bit. You can still do the study guide. The final study guide will still help you in the reading. We'll still have a midterm, but we won't have a final. So if you're watching the recording, hopefully you waited till the end to
Mhm.
learn that we don't have a final. Any other questions about anything?
It's just the mess with you, doctor.
Mm,
Why did you have to pick this expensive book?
mhm. All the
I
books
mean-
are expensive.
Mhm.
I was thinking about, okay, one place was 197. I'm saying, why he picked this book? So
Yeah.
I did the ebook.
Yeah, it's cheaper.
Mhm.
I'm like you, I'm a visual, I have to touch.
Yeah.
It don't want to print right. It don't want to act right when I'm printing.
Yeah, it won't print right because the formatting is off. Yeah, it is expensive. I'm not gonna lie. They're all expensive. What I did is I went in and I said, what's the most expensive book I could find? And that's what I picked.
I have a question for you. I was wondering what resource you would recommend for, on the topic of ADHD,
Mhm.
for specifically teenagers to adulthood. Is
Yeah,
there a book that you
yeah,
recommend that kind of rises above all the rest?
yeah. There's a book called Smart But Scattered, and there's a childhood version, adult version, and teen version. There's a book called well, Russell Barkley is kind of the one of the big names. I'd love Shonda's already gone. I'd love Chandra, could you put in the chat some things you guys use?
Yes, sure will.
That'd be great. I love getting any kind of new information. Russell Barkley's kind of a big deal. Peggy Dawson wrote Smart But Scattered. Smart But Scattered is real good because it's real basic, but it also gives like concrete steps to take. Who
You're
else?
looking for videos, how to ADHD. She's got a lot of really good videos. I don't know how
Oh God,
scientific
yeah,
they are, but they're really, really good. I'm
yeah,
imagining she used the science to base her things, but we like
yeah,
watching those in our house.
yeah. If you go online, you'll find plenty. Yeah, you'll find plenty.
Apologize, I missed what videos did you say, Christina?
I don't know her name, but her platform or her whatever name on YouTube is How to ADHD.
Yeah,
My
it's pretty
daughter
good.
watches her and she really she's learned a lot from her about ADHD, and so have I.
No, it's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, they're good. Attitude, ADDITUDE is a website. I'll just put it in the chat. That's a good website. It doesn't look like it's good, but it's actually really good. Got some good information. We all have ADHD. Y'all know that, right?
Okay.
Like everybody's got some of it. That's why, yeah, Tara Sumter. I've heard of Tara Sumter. I just fall on the side of the executive functioning pieces when people are talking about ADHD, because that's kind of where the research has taken us, especially the neuropsych research. It's really an executive functioning issue. It's not a pull yourself by your bootstraps and white knuckle issue. It's not that. That doesn't work.
Well,
Any other questions about anything?
things be getting real in my house with this ADHD, so I definitely need
Um,
some practical tools.
She's really good. She actually has a checklist for parents that we gave to our parents that narrowed down a lot of things for us to hone in on specifically.
That's good. I love it.
Can
Anything
I
you can find.
Can I ask her, what do you can manage it with food? What you let them eat as well?
I mean, that does help, but everything nowadays has all that stuff in it that we've been trying to keep kids away from. Now it's hidden in things. So the food isn't as effective as it used to be.
Like he said, he's a full adult. So at that time I could have controlled it.
Yeah, that's why I said that, to make you realize it's even if you could now, food isn't what we specifically say to parents anymore, because those things are hidden in everything. Sugar is called so many different things now that it hides in foods.
I love sugar.
So I just wanted Miss Craig to, not feel bad.
I understand. I understand.
You can do all those things.
Y'all are right. Listen, sleep is one of the number one mental health cures. Sleep, and kids don't sleep enough.
And exercise is the second one.
And moving around. I'm actually in the process right now of buying a standing desk because I sit so much. Movement. Y'all see my Peloton? Like I kill myself on that stupid thing back there every week because I'm old and y'all, you get old and you just things hurt, random things, weird stuff. Like I was walking
Just for
along the
no
other day.
reason.
Yeah,
No
I was
reason.
walking the other day and my ankle started hurting. And I was like, what? Why is my ankle hurting? Like it hurt. And then 2 minutes later, it was fine. It doesn't even make sense. It doesn't even make sense.
No, the mind blowing part is you just wake up and it hurts for no
And it
reason.
hurts something back here. It's like I haven't done anything back there. I'm just sitting like this. I've got this scratch. I've got this itch on the side of my, like right here, and there's nothing there. It's just weird. Okay, listen, y'all are a great class so far. This is one of my favorite classes to teach. Now we're gonna get crazy. I'm gonna get crazy in here. I'm gonna go down some rabbit holes in the next couple of classes, but that's okay. We'll come back and get information. If you ever have questions, don't ever hesitate to send a message. And I won't see you guys, but have a good holiday and take a break. Don't do schoolwork for at least like a few days. It's okay. It's not going anywhere. I know some of y'all are like, want to get all your assignments done. Don't, just hang out and chill out. So have a good holiday, and I will see
Thank
y'all
you, you
January
too.
6th.
All right.
You
Thank
too.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.